more knowledge of the healthcare system that can create kind of a differential within the family that can lead to conflict. And this caregiver shared how her work obligations, coupled with her family's expectations of her, sparked conflict for her family. She said, "They told me and my younger sister that we should quit our jobs and stay home and take care of mother. I'm almost close to retirement. That's where the stress started. They accused me of elder abuse because I wasn't there all the time. I said, be logical. I can't afford not to work." And so she's being pulled in one direction with work responsibilities, but her family has some different expectations, and that's fueling conflict. Family structure is another theme under the context, and this is really how families are comprised, so very basic. And we found that families tend to be more at risk if there's been a divorce, separation, remarriage, if there are young children in the home, or if one or more family members live at a distance. That seemed to put them at an increased risk for conflict. In this example, a hospice professional acknowledged how step-family relationships can fuel conflict. This hospice professional said, "I worked with a gentleman who was dying who lived with his girlfriend for years in the family home. When the daughters came, they took over completely. They totally respected this woman's home, and she retreated because she didn't feel comfortable standing up for herself." So she was a life partner of the patient, and the adult siblings weren't respecting her role within the family. So you can see how that kind of relates to how the family is comprised or structured. Another family context issue is pretty straightforward: substance use, abuse, and dependence. So families where there's a history of these issues may be at increased risk for conflict as kind of an underlying factor that can bubble up when they're thrown into caregiving together, making decisions together. And here a daughter highlighted her experience with her brother with substance use. And this is just one piece of what she shared with us. But she said, "His brain is fried on wacky weed, and I try so hard, I try and say he's fried and can't help it, but it's very hard at this point when mom needs, and he's not there, and then it bothers me." And she also went on to share about his alcohol use and how that was disruptive to the current situation as well. Another family context theme is advanced care planning and promises made. So this has to do with the extent to which families have realistically planned for the future prior to the terminal illness being diagnosed. And sometimes they've made promises to avoid nursing home placement or to do other things that maybe weren't realistic. And that's the case in this example that was shared by a hospice professional. She said one of the spouses promised the other that they never would put them in a nursing home. And then when they can't do the care, that's a real hard thing. So they say, "We've got to do this for mom. We've got to put her in a nursing home." And then the other will be saying, "No, we can't. We promised her." Yet there aren't enough caregivers, so sometimes they don't have a choice. So those promises and that lack of realistic advanced care planning kind of set the stage for conflict to surface later on. And then I think this is the last one under the context, yes. So the last one under the family context is faith traditions and belief systems. So differences in spiritual belief systems and values and expectations can sometimes set the stage as well. And this is a quote from a hospice social worker. She shared, "I've seen it where the parent is very traditional Lutheran, the kids are fundamental Christians, they're actively trying to convert. Some of the conflict surrounds the funeral ritual. The patient has chosen cremation and the family members don't believe in cremation. We've seen situations where there's conflict amongst the siblings as well, trying to convince the patient to change their mind on funeral plans that the patient already has in writing." Okay, so differences in belief systems within the family, again, that don't have anything to do necessarily with the end-of-life situation, but really do set that stage for conflict to surface. Okay? So these were the themes that we discovered that we put into this more background factors or more context realm. Any questions or comments about any of those? Yeah.
I hear a strong female voice in oral histories.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if gender figures into any of the conflict, brothers versus sisters, this sort of thing.
Right, we saw, and you'll see this in the contributing factors realm, there's one called role expectations, and we did see some examples of that, the female caregivers reporting that there were certain things expected of them because they were the daughter in that situation, and some resentments and conflict around that. By the way, 14 of the 15 people that we interviewed were female. You know, when the caregivers are more likely to be women, and there are more likely to be these expectations placed upon them. Yeah. Okay. So those are the family context factors. Again, the things that family members have going on. The conditions, so if you look at your handout in front of you and the next line over, the conditions are, and then something happens. Okay? And there are three conditions that we found that are the some things that then happen, that kind of propel the conflict forward. So the first is a decline in the patient's health status or functioning. So they start to decline. They start to become more frail. There's some kind of medical crisis. And oftentimes that brings with it a more heightened need for caregiving. And the family has to make some decisions about what to do. And here's an example of that. Family member shared, it didn't take us long to know she couldn't live alone. She put the frying pan full of water and burned up the frying pan. So we started taking care of her. And then all of a sudden, the other siblings said she needed to be in a nursing home. Well, they pushed it so much that we finally locked them out of the house. I mean, they called social services and said we were abusing just because they wanted her in the nursing home. So they no longer speak to us. Okay, so the patient started to decline, and that's when things really heated up within this family. Another condition that we identified is the admission to hospice and how that can actually, in and of itself, spur conflict because it's a transition into a different type of care, more comfort measures, and there's an expectation for more responsibility, and there are new services and supports which are sometimes difficult for families to accept. This is a daughter caregiver that shared, my older sister was at that meeting with hospice, that admission meeting is what she's referring to. And the phone call later, basically what she said to me was, when you do your scheduling next time, you don't have to schedule me because I may make the wrong decision and I don't want to be responsible for that. At this hospice meeting, they said, we always want you to call hospice first. And we really had to drive home at this meeting that we're trying to make mother comfortable. We're not trying to save her life anymore. And my family has a hard time dealing with it. So she, my sister, chooses not to be involved anymore. So just that transition into hospice and into palliative care can bring up some tensions and conflicts within the family. And then the third condition is what we called the coming out of the woodwork phenomenon, and that was actually a term that the professionals used, where, okay, now this loved one is declining, there's a terminal illness, and family members who had been otherwise distanced or uninvolved suddenly arrive on the scene, and they want to be involved in some way. They want to make decisions, they want to caregive, they want to be present where they hadn't before. And that can create some resentments and tensions and conflicts. So this was also a professional. She said a son or daughter had nothing to do with their parents for lots of years, and then all of a sudden they're dying and they're right there for everything and trying to make all the decisions when the other members were around and close and were helping. And that's a lot of conflict there. So again, we have those background factors, the context. We have the some things that then kind of happen. There's some activity happening. And then the next category are what we identified as contributing factors. These are things that then elevate the risk for families to experience further conflict. And so again, if you kind of look at your handout, you can see the next line over the list of contributing factors, and I'll just briefly review those with you. So one is when one or more family members have some extent of death anxiety, they're not comfortable around death or dying, or they're not accepting of the terminal situation, and that as a contributing factor can kind of increase the conflict. This son, the only son we interviewed, the only male, shared that he, my brother, has a hard time dealing with the fact that she's dying, that mother's dying. He won't go up there, and he actually owns the house she lives in. When the rest of us try to do stuff for mom, he doesn't pitch in, and then it pisses the other ones off. Yeah, so he's not helping because he's not comfortable with what's happening with her health condition. Yeah, so it's kind of a death anxiety. Another contributing factor is when people aren't on the same page. So incongruent perceptions or ideas about the person's health, about the care needs, about preferences for end-of-life care. So people being in disagreement about what should happen. And this was another example shared by a daughter-in-law who is a caregiver. When we took her to the hospital the last time, I called and I said, mother-in-law is in the hospital on IVs. And her son's comment was, why didn't you just let her die? And her thinking was, you can't let somebody die just because they have pneumonia. We weren't at that stage yet. So the disagreement has been they've always wanted to put her in the nursing home and let her go, and we've never felt that way. So very different ideas about where the person's at with their condition and what should happen with their care. So again, kind of an incongruent perception within the family. Another contributing factor has to do with when one or more family members, and it could be the patient, tries to assert control in what others perceive as an inappropriate way. So they try and take over something. They try and assert their opinion or their needs ahead of others. And this is a daughter caregiver who shared about her brother, that he always wanted to stick his nose into mom's financial stuff. He thinks he's the authority over everyone else. And no matter how many of us say to him, you're not the executor until she dies, there's nothing you have to be controlling over and concerned, he does things behind our back. I work at the bank, so he came there while I was on vacation and asked for a copy of her bank statement. Okay, so the adult son trying to step in, taking over the financial matters against the wishes of others, including the patient who is competent to make her own financial decisions at this point in time. Okay? So control can definitely play a role.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Can a bank do that? Give a bank statement?
No, because certain people have to be authorized to be able to access that. But in this case, and I don't know the full story, but my understanding is in this case he tried. And he was very likely turned down. But she found out about it from her coworkers because she worked at the bank, that he had come in and tried to get access to her material or her financial affairs. Yeah. Another contributing factor is communication constraints, when family members just have a hard time communicating. They just maybe have limited communication skills, or they're trying to protect one another. They're not very open about what's happening. In this case, it was a life partner, not a wife, but a life partner of the patient who was sharing a story about communication with the daughters. So the patient, tells the girls, I don't know how long I got. I want you to know what I want. And the girls say, the adult daughters say, oh, no, don't talk about that. Don't talk about that. And I said, we need to talk about that. And I try and tell the girls, we should make some plans here. And they say, oh, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So there's some closed communication, people not wanting to make plans and openly talk. And that's resulting in some tension because the caregiver is feeling a need to move forward and make some plans. Another one is efforts to seek resolution. So oftentimes when someone's diagnosed with a terminal illness, if there's been conflict in the past, people want to resolve it. They don't want the person to die with guilt, or the person themselves has done something and they don't want to die with the guilt and that discord. So people step forward to try and resolve things, but that can sometimes actually create conflict. It might not result in resolution, it might actually create further conflict, as was the case in this situation. My sisters, the ones who had authority to do so, had said he is not allowed to visit her. So he, the ex-husband of the patient, because it would not do her any good. I called them and said, a lot of time has passed. I would really hate to see mom pass away and dad not be able to have his chance to make his peace with her. And they said, absolutely not. We've talked with him, and he's still of the mind that he's going to go there and she's going to beg his forgiveness. So some differences in ideas about whether or not resolution should take place and what that resolution even means, and kind of discord between the siblings about how to handle that. Another contributing factor is when family members vie for a state or position. So we saw a lot of examples of this, unfortunately, where family members are trying to get at their loved one's financial, material, resources, property before the family member has even passed, and arguments that take place within the family around that. So this is an example shared by a spousal caregiver. The patient's daughter is sitting there crying her eyes out. He's not waking up, he's not waking up. The patient had had surgery. He's going to die. And I said, just calm down. Why does he have to wake up this minute? Just give him time. And the daughter says, well, I wanted to know if I could have $100. I know this seems like a joke, but this was actually what happened, according to this spousal caregiver. I wanted to know if I could have $100, and that's what she was waiting for him to wake up for, money, not his health. And I think that's why she never wanted him to have any surgeries in the first place. So this adult daughter was really vying for the patient's resources and creating a lot of trouble. And this is a really dramatic example of this, but we saw a lot of other kinds of examples of family members trying to get at resources, unfortunately. And then I think this is the last contributing factor, and this is the one about role expectations and obligations, where family members have different expectations about who's supposed to be doing what, and oftentimes people aren't on the same page with those expectations. And this is a spousal caregiver. This is actually a younger spouse. The patient was only, I believe, 50, and his spouse was in her 40s. And she says, they, the extended family, feel I should be there 24 hours a day and I shouldn't have a life. That's where the conflict comes in. His mom feels I should be there all the time because when his dad was sick, she was with him. But she was retired. I'm still working. She had another adult daughter all the time to help. I have no one but me. And you try and get that across. Well, you're his wife, well, I'm not a slave. So different ideas about what this adult or what this spousal caregiver should be doing and how much attention she should be giving her husband now at the end of life. Okay. So we have those, again, kind of going back to the model, we have those context factors. We have the things that then happen, and these contributing factors which can put families more at risk. Then the next part of the model are the different forms of conflict that we identified. Again, conflict between the patient and one or more family members, conflict within the family, or it could be conflict between the family and a hospice or another healthcare provider as well. We saw examples of that too. So I'm not going to go through exactly